Hey there, Jim Johnson for Accent Help, and I want to talk about a concept of strong form versus weak form of words. So this is along the line of the stressed version versus the unstressed version. So you may be familiar with the concept with syllables that you have a stressed syllable and an unstressed syllable, or multiple unstressed and multiple stressed. So if I say the word above, in that one the is the unstressed syllable, whereas above is the stressed syllable. Now, when you're also looking at words in the context of a phrase, you can have words that are more stressed and words that are less stressed. And in fact, that difference between stressed and unstressed is really essential for performers, for actors, especially for the stage, to differentiate what the audience really needs to understand versus what the audience can almost not pay nearly as much attention to. Right? So that differentiation of stress versus unstressed is an essential skill set for actors to learn, especially about elongation, because that's what lets the audience really catch up. More about that another time. So, stressed words versus unstressed words. So there are words that are really, really commonly unstressed, like various prepositions, in, on, of, and such. They don't tend to be stressed, whereas there are lots of verbs and nouns especially that will have a tendency to be stressed. Adjectives and adverbs may be more likely to be stressed. Conjunctions, less so. Once in a while you'll need to. So the difference between the strong version and the weak version, or strong form, weak form, that's one of those concepts that when I'm doing IPA work specifically, I like to play around with the word and, A-N-D, right? So a strong form of and might be transcribed like that. Now, most of the time that word isn't and. A lot of us in fact say and, something more like the for the first part of that. So most of the time it's actually something more like un, or even this and that. That's the whole rock and roll thing. Rock and roll, potentially. Or maybe with a small schwa in front of that. Rock and roll. Something along that line. So realize that you can have weaker forms of words and stronger forms of words. If I explode the D, if I give an explosion on the end of that, that is, and I'm going to use a little diacritic of a schwa that doesn't exist in the IPA but is commonly used to show and, right? I could add some length to the vowel, and that would be another way to show stress. Now, you can also use the primary stress symbol, for example, to add stress to it. So you can add stress. You can also subtract stress. So I could take that and instead, above the ash, I could put mid-centralized, which means that it moves towards a schwa. So it takes the sound and moves it towards but it's not all the way to and, but instead it's and. So it starts to get weakened. So that's another way of demonstrating a weak form of that. In fact, a lot of times when a vowel is slightly distinct but is sort of thrown away, I think that what's happening most of the time, it's represented well by putting the little X above it, meaning mid-centralized, moving it towards the schwa. So that's the concept of strong form versus weak form. That's one of the reasons that there's not one pronunciation that is the right pronunciation of a word. One of the impacts that this also has on accents for actors, which is what is my specific area of interest, is that where the sounds are most distinct, where you can go, oh, that's a sound element of that accent, is always going to be in stressed words or stressed syllables. It's going to be when it's a strong form of that sound or of the ow diphthong or of whatever it is. When it's a strong form of that, that is when it's most useful to pay attention to it so that you can go, oh, that's the sound. So for example, for a New Yorker, a word like coffee that will tend to get some rounding, when it's very stressed, they may actually go all the way to say quo, or, where you'll get almost an O and then an off glide onto a schwa, or, or, coffee, coffee. But most of the time, it's not quite going to be the strong form of it. It's going to be a little bit of a weaker form, and it's just more potentially coffee. Oh. Not as rounded, not as extreme, not turning into a slight diphthong. So when it is the weak form, that's when the sound is not as blatant and distinct, but it is how it is pronounced. Where it's really useful for you to pay attention is, now what is the strong form of that? Because that's going to tend to be more extreme. So that's why I think that strong form and weak form are really important for accents, for especially theater performers, but also film actors in general. Strong form versus weak form is very helpful because the idea that, especially if you're doing some kind of an elevated fancy pants accent, the idea that everything needs to be clear actually makes it less clear for the audience, because we need some of the mumble to offset what's not important from what is really essential for the audience to understand. So that's the importance of strong form versus weak form with regards to performance. For more info on accents for actors, check out accenthelp.com.